All right, what's going on? Welcome to Poly with us. Thanks for tuning in. I'm here today with my guy Fa. How you feeling?
Good, man. Just about a hoop after
Yeah,
this.
yeah. For
So
those of you that can't see him, he got his LeBron headband on. He got the chalk. He's about to, throw the chalk in the air. Now he we was talking off air a little bit. He was telling me his handle is trash though. That's what he told
they
me.
are trash. So if you're guarding me, you don't got to worry about anything.
So can you at least get open like Rick Hamilton used to do? Because Rick Hamilton wasn't really a dribbler like that, but he had those moves. He can get in open space and hit that mid range.
I can do that. I can come off screens. I can set screens, come off of them, and I can hit the mid range, and I can hit some threes.
Get some
So
threes too.
I'm a better shooter than Ben Simmons for sure.
I mean, that's not too
Not
hard to
it's
do
not
at this
not saying
point
a lot
right
though.
now.
But everybody's talking about him though.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully Ben will work at it this off season. Actually get in there. I mean, he doesn't have to shoot threes, but he needs just at least a little shot, at least a mid range shot, something.
And then take them. Like just take
Yeah,
those shots because defense will give you them. So
yeah. Because if he had just a little jump shot, he'll be unstoppable. There's really nothing you can do with him. He just needs just a little jump shot. Like for example, right? Rondo really is not a good shooter, but he'll take the shot, and sometimes he'll make it. He can get on little streaks where he hit a three, where he can hit a mid range, even though he's not a great shooter. You don't have to be a great shooter. You just have to be a little bit of a threat. Because how they used to got Rondo, they used to just back up off him, but
just
he will still take those shots though. Because
right, exactly.
you can't be scared to take those shots. Like remember San Antonio? That's how they guard LeBron. They'll back off and
And
be able
oh
to shoot.
07, yep.
But he started taking those shots. You got to be able to do that.
Exactly.
Now, speaking of taking a shot, progressives need to start taking their shots as well. Now, I feel like this session, progressives been doing a lot what Philly and Ben Simmons was doing. They haven't been taking the shot. We talked about this a few months ago with the public option, right? They should have been pushing for the public option. A report just came out, right, that during this pandemic, like 80 million people was on Medicaid. That is crazy. That
Hmm.
is crazy. If you have those type of numbers, you can justify transitioning into a public option.
Right.
And the numbers with Medicaid and the CHIP program, the Child Health Insurance Program, was well combined. Like you have those type of numbers, you can parlay that into a public option and push for it. Especially since a public option is not as scary as Medicare for all for some people, even though eventually I think that's where we definitely need to get to. But as Biden is in office and that's what he's campaigned on. They should have been pushing him for it. But I don't know your opinion on this. What do you think of the progressive strategy so far on healthcare? I know instead of pushing for the public option, the push been to lower the Medicare age to 60s. What do
Hmm.
you think about this strategy versus pushing for a public option?
I understand why the Medicare age is the one they're trying to go at. It seems like the lowest hanging fruit in terms of the budget resolution that both the House and the Senate are going to pass to set up the next reconciliation package. Um, but I think they're aiming not high enough. I actually agree with you that the public option's not even in the conversation. I mean, there has been nothing, literally nothing, the last 4 or 5 months since Biden got in. And Biden, remember, ran on the public option. And even if you remember, I don't know if you remember, but if you were watching TV or if you were watching YouTube videos, you got advertisements from this group in DC. It's called the American Health Insurance Coalition. I forgot what it's called. But anyway, they're running a lot of ads because they were getting kind of nervous that, when the Dems took power, that they would actually propose like a public option in within the Obamacare framework, right? Like they would increase the subsidies and then they also add the public option. But yeah, in terms of what the progressives are doing, I don't think it's been an effective strategy either. And I think they're just trying to pick their battles of what they think they can actually affect the most change, because within the Democratic caucus in the House, you have half of them maybe that would sign on to Medicare for all, but when it comes to a vote, in terms of like a public option, they all would say, "Oh, we support a public option," but nobody's like leading that charge to get that done in the House or the Senate. And then the Senate, as we know, is much more conservative. All those Dems there, especially those 10 right-wing Dems. Everybody talks about Sinema and Manchin, but those 10 like right-wing Dems that are there.
Warner, Coons.
The one of them from New Hampshire, Shaheen.
Yeah.
The other one from the one from California, Dianne Feinstein. I mean,
Tester.
Though Tester, he's kind of better than a lot of them a little bit.
He's better than a lot of them, but still, because he's come from a conservative state too.
He's coming from a conservative state, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So you have that coalition. The Democrats themselves, it's a hot mess, just like because you have a party that's not ideologically homogeneous at all. And in terms of healthcare, it's just and plus also the Democrats don't want to touch. It seems like they don't want to touch healthcare at all now. Like just because
it's
politically,
so ridiculous.
Just because politically they are so shell shocked from 2010,
but
they're hitching their wagons on the infrastructure plan, and then that looks like to be a disaster right now because they want to do a bipartisan deal, and this bipartisan deal is basically what Trump was proposing in 2017, like the privatization, they're talking about user fees. They're talking about recycling infrastructure to investors, which means selling off public works, like some of the ports, some of the bridges, a whole bunch of stuff. It's kind of crazy. Yeah. And it's a $1 trillion package, which if
a lot of that money is reallocated as well.
It's just reallocated, exactly. So why? So I hope that the progressives in the House and in the Senate can muster up the votes to block that and force the Biden administration and these Democrats to go reconciliation.
Well, I want to get into that in 1 second, but they shouldn't be scared of healthcare at all. Healthcare is what won them a lot of seats in Congress. Exactly. That's how they really won Congress back in 2018. Biden campaigned on a public option. Like for me, it doesn't go far enough, but that's what he campaigned on. A public option, if you poll it, it polls very well.
Right.
And if you really want the Affordable Care Act to work, you kind of need something like a public option. Because if you go on a marketplace, I don't know if you ever went on a marketplace and tried to get insurance on the marketplace before.
I haven't, but I've done it. I've done it for my parents before. Well, I haven't done it.
Yeah, I haven't actually picked it. I looked at it a few years ago, and it really wasn't cheap at all. And I don't think I didn't fall under the categories of getting a ton of subsidies either, because I know for some of the marketplace that you get a subsidy. If you're doing all that, you might as well have a public option. And if you're going to put money in Cobra, you might as well get a public option. If you had 80 million people on the chip and on Medicaid, you might as well do a public option. Right. And again, this was something that was campaigned on. But I think just if you look at strategy, I just think that sometimes progressives don't go for the right strategies. For example, like it was a whole big thing of forced to vote with Medicare for all, which had zero chance of passing.
Right.
Absolutely zero chance of passing. Now, this is not a big secret, but Democrats really don't want the public option either. Biden didn't really want a public option. They had a chance to push for that in 2010. Yeah. Now, Medicare for all is much better, But these conservative Dems don't want a public option at all. But because they campaigned on it, you could have put public pressure and forced a vote on the public option if you really wanted to
Right.
force a vote.
Right.
That way, they'll be on the hook in Congress, and you could have asked them, like, you don't support Biden policy. Biden campaigned on a public option. That would have put pressure on the White House. And that could have realistically passed, in my opinion, if we would have had the right strategy. But we just don't. We just don't. It's a combination of things. You have some on the left that want no compromise. And I'm sick of compromising too. But what I'm looking at is not necessarily compromise, like what realistically we can get done in this session. We knew once Biden won the nomination, stuff like Medicare for All wasn't going to happen because you're just not going to pressure him to do something like that. So what can realistically could we get with Biden? So what I would have did, what we should have did is looked at Biden plans. What was the best aspects of his campaign? Because he promised a bunch of stuff. What was his best plans? Okay, the public option was right there. Force him to do what he said. He also said that nobody could pay over 8.9% of their yearly salary towards healthcare. That was going to be a cap. There's realistic things we can do. Also, with the lowering the Medicare age, just a bad strategy. Under Hillary Clinton plan, it was 55. So we're going backwards on that.
Right.
So I know Bernie is supposed to introduce in reconciliation, lowering Medicare to 60. Why not go to 55?
Right.
And if you really want that to pass, go for 65. I mean, go for 55. Because it's probably going to get negotiated down to 60 anyway if you do that.
Right.
Why do we start at where the compromise should be at as a negotiating point? That doesn't make sense.
That's a classic Democratic position. Doesn't matter what spectrum people fall on the Democratic Party. It seems like that's a common occurrence.
And nobody do that in negotiation. Like if you just go negotiating for a car, you try to talk them down. You don't give what you expect to give. If you ever bought a house before, like I sold my house a couple years ago, even when I bought my house, you don't give your best offer up front. It's negotiations, back and forth usually.
Back and forth, yeah.
So why do the Dems start off with what the compromise should be? Because a lot of them is more conservative. They don't really mind the more conservative policy. That's what it is. But it's up to us to force them to do the right policy. And I'm just frustrated at the strategy.
No, I agree. I completely agree. I just don't think that the strategy is yielding anything. I don't think that there's enough pressure on this particular issue. There's really just been no attention on it. I mean, I don't know when their window would be, because right now, as we talked about before, we're in June. It's almost the end of June. It's almost July. Congress doesn't do nothing in August, right? They're not even here in DC in August. So, and like we just saw, the For the People Act just failed in the Senate because of the filibuster. Ha ha ha.
What a shocker.
Right. Shocking. And and so there's, like, what's going to be the catalyst to make the Democrats realize they don't have a lot of time, and they're going to lose the House next year just based on redistricting. So what's going to push these folks beyond us, but the voters, trying to push them? I mean, it just seems like it just seems like there's too many of them that are resigned to not doing anything, in my opinion.
Now, this is what I want to talk about, because we're going to get into the infrastructure bill, but on a local level, what's some policies we can do and really enact at a local level? I know each area is different, and this is why it's hard to get one concrete strategy on a local area, because each demographic is different. So the demographics and what's acceptable in, let's just say, Atlanta will be not necessarily the same in DC, not necessarily the same where I'm at in Buffalo or in New York City.
Hmm.
But I think there's certain stuff we can do. Um, Things like healthcare is really hard to do on a local level.
Yeah.
I know a few years ago, De Blasio did some type of public health program there, but it was for just like the ultra poor. It wasn't nothing like a major public option. So something like healthcare would be hard to do on the local level. On the state level, depending on how progressive your state is, you might be able to push for a state healthcare plan, even though it really better if it comes from federal government. But like here in New York State, we have the New York Health Plan that's actually really getting the push. At the end of the day, I don't think they really going and act single payer on the state level, but at least it's a push. I know California pushed for it a few years ago. So I think that's a longer fight that can get done in some progressive states, but um, it's going to be tough. The reason why I'm bringing it up, and hopefully I don't sound like I'm ranting, is that policies that seem impossible now oftentimes start at a local and state level, and then it snowballs way not down but up. It builds up steam, and eventually it gets to the federal level. Something like marijuana legalization, right? It
Hmm.
started off really at local levels with
You're right.
certain municipalities not really cracking down on arresting people for marijuana, or they will allow you to have a certain amount of grams on you without getting arrested.
Yeah.
So certain municipalities was doing that for a while. Then in, I believe, was it 2010 when marijuana became legal in Colorado and Washington State.
Washington State. Yeah.
Right. And it took those, that's when it really started hitting all the state levels. Even before that, the legalization of medical marijuana was state
Yeah.
through the states, even though it's still illegal in the federal government. And now you have like almost just about half the states where marijuana is either legal recreationally or medically. So that policy, even though it's still illegal federally, but I feel like we're really close. Maybe not with Biden because he's so conservative, but if the next Democratic president, and maybe even depending on who, if a Republican in there, it's still a possibility depending on who it is. But we really close with marijuana.
Yeah. Yeah.
So regardless of how you feel about something like gay marriage, right? Um, and I'm not bringing that up again. This is not whether you for it, against it, whatever. It's about the strategy. The strategy started at state levels.
Sorry, at the state level. Yeah. It's really, yeah. That's how it started. And the national attitude was obviously hostile. And, I
Right.
mean, you even look at George W. Bush's 2004 campaign. I mean, they were running that culture war on that front hard.
Hmm.
And then obviously it was they basically what, like a decade, and after that, then you're starting to see all of these you know these laws being passed at the state level, permitting it or lessening the discriminatory measures against it, and then obviously then Obama came out for it, and Biden had come out for it, so that was at the top, and then the Supreme
Yeah.
Court decision, that
Even
was.
before that, what really kicked it off was even a more purple state in Iowa. It got legalized there. The Supreme
Mm,
Court said it was legal there. New
right.
York was one of the major states that became legal in too. Before the Supreme Court got involved and made it legal. So I'm looking at certain policies. In your opinion, what policies can start at the local or state level? And I know it's different. So, like a local area like Atlanta, they have to deal with being in a conservative state overall, like Georgia, where the Republicans control everything on the state level, but you can control out on the local level. So you're gonna have that situation in certain um, local areas, but for others, What do you think we could push at the local level and then eventually maybe a state level before we get to the federal government?
Yeah, I think at the local level, if you're talking about like the municipal level, if you're talking
Mhm.
about the county level, you
County
could
or cities, depending on
the
where you're
county
at.
or cities,
Hmm.
yeah. Um, Things like, everybody talks about housing. I think things like local, zoning laws to enable more housing to be built. That's one thing that I know that's at the local level, a big thing. That's a big thing that's talked about in Washington, D.C. It's a big thing talked about here in PG County and other places. That's one thing where if you're able to pass legislation at that level to enable more housing to be built, that would definitely help the real estate market and the consumer, which right now it's been crazy.
Now,
Um,
can you explain that a little bit more? I just want to
yeah,
follow up questions about that because that might be vague for some people. Now, these zoning laws, how does that restrict housing from being built? And if you change that laws, would the money be there to actually build affordable housing?
that's a good question. So a lot of these zoning laws are ancient, and they basically are put in place by, depending on where you're at. Like, let's say it's Washington D.C.
Hmm.
You got neighborhoods where you got neighborhood associations that have lobbied to keep these zoning laws where it just has the same plots of land where there could be construction, and then after that there's no more construction, right?
Hmm.
And then you have developers who come in who want to build on, let's say, a historic, like part of a park, right?
Hmm.
Or like a historic, or part of this historic roadway or whatever, and it's part of this neighborhood. So in DC, for example, you have laws that 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 basically prohibit that kind of construction because of culture stuff, or cultural heritage stuff, or it could be, or in some other neighborhoods it's because the neighborhood, because you have a lobby in the city that is actually actively keeping those laws there, so that you can't have new housing built. And if you do have new housing built, you have more supply, which also affects the property prices, which would dent somebody's wealth, right? So that's basically what I'm getting at in terms of the zoning laws. um, in terms of like changing them at the local level, like I know, or in terms of like not changing them, but in terms of like funding, like of new new housing units, yeah, at the local level that's tougher to fund. I feel like that's something that, you know that's something that the state government and the federal government work on with with housing and urban development, depending on the allocation of funds during a year. um, that's something that in good times where you have a, where like Obama, for example, when he was president, more money went to HUD, right?
Hmm.
um, you saw money from HUD going to some localities to build more housing. um, Stuff like that is possible. Obviously, that's kind of reliant on the federal government, but at the local level, you could make the seeds planted for where in the future it could be possible, where you
Yeah.
could have, if you did have some of these laws changed, and then you could have more housing built. But it is sort of a vague thing, but it's kind of like, and also in another way, in my opinion, the more specific example is just like in a city where there's there's not a lot of housing built. That's like the best way to get rents and housing prices a little bit more under control, because right now it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's very crazy
Yeah,
with the price of rent. Hopefully, with housing, I know lumber prices has went down a
yeah,
little
they've
bit
gone down a
now.
little bit. Yeah, yeah.
So that should curve any fears of inflation, and also we'll see how that impact the housing market right now. So, but we'll see. As far as a local policy, the reason why I want to discuss this and the reason why this is important, I want people to understand this, right? Too often on our side of things that we don't have a concrete strategy, and right now it's hard on the federal level on several fronts. Not only you have the Supreme Court as an obstacle, you have a very conservative Democratic administration in office, and just the fact he's not doing what we want to do is going to be even harder after next month. Not just because of August, but we mentioned this before. People is about to get a lot of money. A lot of people's about to get a lot of money with the child tax credit that
Right.
some of them don't even know is coming. I was just talking to somebody the other day. They about to receive a lot of money and they don't even know it. And I was educating them about the process and what it is. So once people get money, they probably gonna be like, "Oh, Biden's doing a great job. I got some money."
Right.
So
And then
it's
complacency will set in.
again, yep,
Yeah.
not looking at the bigger picture. So
Right.
long term, I think we have to tackle local and state, and I think steam up to federal level. But right now, we can control local level. So
Yeah.
a strategy is like, let's just say UBI, right?
UBI. I was gonna say UBI. Yeah, that was the next one.
I think because some pilot programs have happened in a few local municipalities, especially with marijuana becoming legal. A proposal that's here is because marijuana just became legal in New York State, for our county is to take the funding that we going to get with marijuana with taxation and use that as UBI for the poorer neighborhoods in the city.
Hmm.
I think that's a realistic policy that can happen on the local level without even the state being involved, because again, depending where you at, it's harder to get things done on state level as well.
Exactly.
If you want to donate to campaigns to the city council, you can do a lot less money than you can with trying to donate to the governor or your local congressman. So I'm looking at those type of policy. I think that's where we need to come together with is okay on the economics. Should we do something with housing and how can what policies is best on the local level with housing? Should we focus on UBI? Should we focus on some type of business incentives for poorer communities or especially for Black communities? Because I'm always looking for what's best for Black policy because we've been left out of so many different programs. What can we do on a local level progressively? I would love funding for Black businesses, make grants available, training. Like we need to come up with some type of concrete policies we can push on a local level where progressives, I won't say are in control, but have a better chance of getting in control.
Yeah,
Like,
I think on the UBI front, I think there's momentum there because you've got a lot of mayors all over the country that are kind of collaborating on that, and it'd be interesting if you could get a couple of governors involved in that too, because then you might actually get like a real momentum on UBI, like momentum we haven't seen since like the 60s probably, like because in the 60s they were doing pilot projects in different parts of the country, and so now we're seeing more of that all over the place. I think the city of Oakland just announced
they did a pilot.
Yeah,
Mhm.
a new pilot. Yeah,
I
so
think they did a pilot in Stockton as well.
Stockton, right? The former mayor, he lost last year.
Right.
Yeah, had piloted that project. So I think that's one. I think the other thing, and we touched upon it before, was police reform. I think that is a thing that at the local level, definitely at the
Definitely do
local
that.
level, that's definitely doable. And I think that's definitely doable with a lot of these, as I mentioned, a lot of these mayors, a lot of these state governments where the Democrats do have majorities or do have the governor mansion. Like in Maryland, for example, like the Democratic legislature actually did pass a pretty good bill a couple months back on several items on police reform. And I know in what was it in Minnesota? Obviously, there's a lot going on there in Minneapolis. So I think there's a lot that can happen. I think that's also sort of not entirely, but it's sort of trickled up to Congress because you do have the George Floyd Act that we've known about. That came because of pressure from activists, and that came from a lot of activity at the local level. So I think those are kind of the three things that I was thinking about because I think other items, I think other items like grants to small like Black businesses, that's something that I wish we could do it from the federal side because we know what happened with PPP, we know what happened with we always talk, and we also talk about reparations. Shout out to us getting shout out to Juneteenth becoming a holiday, but if that's all that they want to do, I mean,
right.
And
I'm not even talking about that on the political show. Now I am doing a show called Flashing Black. We could do something on Juneteenth with that because history is important. I don't think symbolism is worthless, but right now we need more than symbolism. It's cool.
We need tangibles.
But but we definitely do. So we need to formulate this, and I think every show I'm going to mention a local policy that we can start pushing for. I know UBI is definitely one of them. Police reform in my area, we passed Carrie-O law. Carrie-O Horn was a police officer here in the city of Buffalo. She stopped a fellow police officer from doing a tremendous amount of damage to a suspect they had in custody. She stepped in, and the other officer actually punched her, but they fired her.
Mm-hmm.
But just now, and they fired her right before she was able to get her pension. And this happened like in 2006. She was just able to get her pension earlier this year.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier this year, or it might have been last year, because I had to get everything's blending in. But within the last year, she was able to get her pension. They passed Carrie-O law here in the city of Buffalo, which states that if a police officer see another police officer using excessive force or doing what they're not supposed to do, they are mandated to step in, which should be the bare minimum. Right. So you can do police reform on the local level. You can put pressure on the mayor. Mayors pick the police chief. So that definitely is something we can do. But we definitely need to start thinking about economics on a local level and how we can really have an impact on that. The school system is an absolute mess. And that's difficult to do as well. But yeah, that's every show I want to start talking about that. Speaking of local elections, it's not my area, but my wife is from the area. My wife is from New York City, but New York is having mayor race. Let me see. When I think polls close at 9 here in New York City, in the state, but we might not get any results tonight just because they have ranked choice voting, and I think every place should have ranked choice voting. By the way, that's another thing.
Right.
But I don't know. How do you feel about the mayor race? 'Cause I got my opinions. I'm gonna let you go.
I mean, obviously, I'm not in New York. I'm not a New Yorker, but just seeing it from afar, it seems like it's been a crazy hot mess of a race where it doesn't seem like any candidate has really stuck out or has kind of sort of separated themselves in terms of like being pretty good on policy. Like, I just feel like, you got some that are better than others for sure, but it just doesn't seem like you have somebody who has that mix of, who knows what they're going to do when they get in and can actually implement it. I mean, I think just from the vantage point where I'm at, I see that Garcia has a lot of municipal experience, but can she win? I don't think so. Eric Adams also has been involved in city, but this guy has a lot of terrible policies, and he's a former cop. Funny thing is, I don't even think he's got endorsed by his own former union, which is funny. Then you got Andrew Yang, who was the front runner for for the whole race until like the last 3 weeks, and he's fallen off a cliff because people clearly see that his campaign's being run by Bradley Tusk, the Bloomberg advisor. So he's basically a robot. He's not, the guy is just churning out whatever his consultants are telling him to do. And then you've seen Maya Wiley rise up in the polls. All I know about her is that she's a lawyer and
AOC endorsed her.
AOC endorsed her, so she's kind of taken the progressive lane away from Scott Stringer, who's also fallen off the cliff after all those allegations came out and everybody unendorsed him and all that stuff. So yeah, it's a hot mess. I mean, it looks like Adams is going to win, which is, I think, terrible for New York.
I do too.
But I think that's going to happen, and I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how. I didn't check to see. I haven't really followed his campaign that much, but I don't know who's really funding him, who's really backing him.
Yeah.
So.
His answers is very unimpressive to me. Now, most of the time, mayor races won't get national attention, but New York is the biggest city in the U.S. and it have a major impact. Whoever is the mayor of New York usually have a national impact, so it is important. So
it also goes back to what you were talking about a little bit earlier. What they do at the local level, the Democrats will try to do national level, whether that's good or bad.
Right. And man, this just been a mess of a race. I think it's a mess because it really was Yang.
It was Yang's to lose.
And he lost it.
Yeah.
This is one of the worst campaigns I've ever seen in my life. Yang campaign. Number one, I don't know why he thought Bloomberg was popular.
Right.
Bloomberg was stop and frisk.
Right.
Violating people's rights. And he had been exposed on his presidential run. I think he thought it would be okay to be associated with Bloomberg because Bloomberg have money. And I think in their world, like establishment world, Bloomberg is respected. But Bloomberg name tastes like what, if you say it. Being associated with that hurts. So you being associated with all of Bloomberg scandals, all his policies, and basically let people know you a corporate shield too. And one of Yang's appeals was being an outsider,
right?
Thinking outside the box with UBI. His UBI plan was feckless for New York. It wasn't even worth doing it. He proposed, I believe his plan was proposed a UBI for what?
The 500,000 people that had like $2,000 or something like that.
Yeah, for about
for a year.
500,000 people. New York, now that seemed like a lot, but New York City, it's a city over 8 million people.
Right.
So that's a fraction of the population. And I understand it's hard to do it on a local level.
Right.
But besides that, what was he offering?
More money for the police.
Again, a turn off. So it was really his to win. He had the biggest name. He had the momentum, but he just kept messing up. The Israel comments didn't help with progressives. And I think because again, he's associated with Bloomberg, who is a big Zionist.
Right.
And I think maybe because of that, and because New York have a significant Jewish population, he thought that was the route to go. But New York is a very diverse city, so and not all Jewish people support the Netanyahu government or the former Netanyahu government. I should say now,
or the state of Israel itself, or everything the state of Israel does. Right. Yeah.
Right. Not all Jewish people support the policies of that right-wing conservative government.
Right.
So that hurt him. He was better off not saying anything. As the mayor of New York City, he didn't have to say anything.
Didn't have to say anything, yeah.
So he went out of his way to make that comment, and it's just like you don't know what you're doing. You can't. Andrew Yang is probably the worst person reading the room ever.
Right.
He and like I noticed this during the presidential debate. I thought all his debates on the presidential level was terrible. If he wasn't talking about UBI, he made a little bit of sense with UBI, and I don't even like the way his version of UBI. I think could be done a lot better. By the way,
Right. Of course. Yeah.
but if it wasn't talking about UBI, he made a lot of sense on automation because automation is going to be a big problem. People's not talking about it.
Right.
I even hear some progressives laughing at that. I'm like, no, automation is going to be a problem.
Right.
But if it wasn't on that subject, he didn't know what he was talking about on like any other issue. Everything circled back to UBI. I'm like, UBI is important, but it don't solve every problem.
Right. He circled it all back. Climate change will give you money to move to higher ground. Yeah. It's
right.
it's which honestly is not a bad policy idea on the merits, to be honest with you, because some
Right.
people will need that. But at the same time, yeah, you're right. It was his race to lose, and he lost it. And honestly, he didn't need to hire that firm to run his campaign, because from the presidential campaign, he had a donor list.
Right.
And he also broke I believe, the record for most donors in a mayoral race. I mean,
Right.
so money was not the problem. So why he hired those people? Why did if those people were the ones who told him to run? Did he feel like he had to hire them? I don't know, but basically his appeal was neutered with that decision.
And now it looked like Adams is going to win, and
Yeah.
I wanted to support Adams. Black man. I'll always root for that. Then I started listening to him, like looking at his past. I'm like,
yeah, he used to be a Republican.
I can't do it. I can't do it.
Yeah.
It's funny because on a site that we both on, I was debating with some people, and I don't know. I think this happened a little bit in real life in New York City too. There's some black people twisting themselves in the press so and not trying to defend a racist policy like stop and frisk just because they want to support Adams because he's a black man. I'm like, I don't care who you are. If you support stop and frisk, you're being racist. I don't care if you black yourself. It's a racist policy. And his defense is, well, I would apply it differently and it could be effective, but the way the NYPD applied it, that was the problem. No, it's a problem in itself. It basically violates the Fourth Amendment. And when stop and frisk, because I know a lot of people in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
What it basically did, it harassed regular people like just you, right? You going outside with a headband on, a lot of NYPD cops would just search you.
Right.
And it wasn't even a effective policy. Like if you look at the numbers, over 90% of the time they found nothing. Very rarely they found any guns on people. Really, and crime was still going on.
Right.
Because why? Because they was randomly just stopping and frisking regular people. I know a lot of people that are like hipsters in New York, black hipsters that live in Brooklyn, that live all throughout the boroughs, and they would get stopped and frisked, and it was nothing straight about them. So you wasting time stopping and frisking them. Like it's crazy. It is not an effective policy. It's just target and harass innocent people and it build resentment. It's a terrible policy.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that he just didn't come out and just say, oh, it was an outright bad policy. I was at the NYPD and I was arguing and fighting against it. He wasn't saying that. He just said, oh, it could be applied better. What way are you planning to apply it? And you know how many races is in police units. I mean, there's FBI reports about white supremacists infiltrating local police officers. Local police municipalities. It's not like NYPD have the best reputation to begin with anyway. So you don't think they're going to take advantage of that? So who you think they're going to target?
Exactly.
Like, he lost me completely there. He doesn't seem to have a solid plan when it comes to housing. I just don't see the appeal because he's the Brooklyn
From
borough
borough
president.
president, yeah.
But as far as policy, and that's my problem with politics. This is why I want to grow this outlet, because we have to have a bigger voice. As far as policy, Adams is terrible. He's very conservative.
But yeah. Like I said, he used to be a Republican.
Right, right. And he actually want to expand the police department,
Yeah.
which, and I feel a few different ways about it, right? I don't necessarily mind more police on the streets if we fix the underlying issues.
Right.
If we fix the issues of, okay, there's real consequences if you use excessive force, if you violating people's rights, whatever. Okay, I don't mind more police force in bad neighborhoods or high crime neighborhoods if we fixing the underlying problem. The problem is that people try to justify this. Just because it's a high crime area doesn't give police the right to use excessive force.
Exactly.
Use each individual case is different. It doesn't give you the right to just randomly violate somebody constitutional rights with no probable cause. Just searching people with no probable cause, no nothing. That's a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
Exactly.
So no, yes, there's different things you can do to bring crime down, and the defund police movement. Like I think we talked about this before. It need to be marketed better.
Yeah, of
Because
course.
people's
Yeah.
confused about what it is.
Yeah.
Basically, it's just, okay, if somebody having a mental health problem, instead of calling a police officer, you call their social worker, you could call their mental health counselor, and they can help diffuse the situation better than a police officer who don't have training in that specific area.
Right. The branding of it was just terrible from the jump last summer, and I didn't want to believe it, but then I had to really believe it later on. I was like, yeah, this was not the way to brand what we want to see from the police or what we want to see from, expanded social services and things like that.
Right.
So.
And I know my guy Heem, eventually he want to live in a society that don't have police at all, and I feel that eventually, hopefully, as humanity, eventually we could get there, but we're not going to get there anytime soon. And right now we have to live and to be fair to him, he wasn't talking about tomorrow either.
Right.
But in the future we need to start thinking about these type of things. But right now, you can't campaign on nothing like that. So you really have to you really have to be careful with the way you marketing it. But that doesn't give politicians an excuse to run away from police reform. You brand it the way you want to brand it then. You don't have to call it defund the police. You could say increase mental health services.
You could break along.
Yeah,
you could break it up. Yeah, you could break. Yeah, exactly. You could break it up. You could break it down into 3 or 4 different pieces. It doesn't have to be one overarching thing, which is what I was a little frustrated by when I first heard about it. And I know people were emotional, and it comes from the emotion, right? It comes from the raw emotion of seeing people get abused or killed by the police and whatnot. But at the same time, we have to also realize that the police are pretty popular in a lot of places. And I don't want to say, I don't want to dampen the parade, but in a lot of places in America, we're talking about America. You got old people who are defund the police. What does that mean? If I call 911, what's going to happen? You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's a very simple mentality, but it makes sense just from if you just think about it from their perspective, right? These older boomer people, and these older people, even older Black people, right?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, I know we have to leave in a second, but it's not just older people too. There's a lot of younger people that don't know what it means
It's
either.
true.
Like you see
It's
it on
true.
shows. Like I do show reviews too. I don't. You ever watch the show The Shy?
No, I have not watched it.
You heard of it? On
I
Showtime is about based in Chicago.
it's on Showtime, you said?
Yeah, but
Yeah. On Showtime, yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
anyway, this season they have a plot that the mayor defunded the police, right? In the show.
Yeah.
And they have it like there's no police going to be patrolling the neighborhood. I'm like, that's not what defund the police means. Like, I'm like, it's not like police not going to be in the neighborhood. It's like you want to demilitarize them. There's
Right.
no reason for police to be riding around on tanks. There's and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And just giving money, like the increase in budget that they always get to social services to help. Yeah, that's
They're prioritizing resources. The thing is, this is the thing with the right, how they're able to so easily frame things
Mhm.
and frame them right back at the left or whatever, and just like make it so much more simple, childlike, easy to understand, easy to demonize.
Mhm.
They've mastered it down to a T, and it's like they're always able to do it, and it's just, and then they have
Right.
allies, with the media,
Yep.
which will parrot all their stupid talking points.
That's why they need us, because right now they talking about how crime have been going up, and it has, but it's not just in cities; it's been going up in rural areas as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Rural areas where there's not a lot of people that look like me and you either.
Right.
So how do they explain that? It's not that the police it demoralized there, is it?
Right.
So what's the problem there? Is because the economy had a major downshift because of COVID.
Right.
That's the reason crime is going up.
Exactly.
All right. So before we get out of here, just one more question. What you think going to happen with this infrastructure bill? You think it's going to get passed? You think that progressives going to hold strong and be able to get some things in there? They threatening to vote against it. What's your feeling on it?
I'm hoping that I'm hoping the bipartisan bill fails, the Senate one. I don't think it will pass the House, and I think that will force the Biden administration to really push hard for the reconciliation packages that they were going to push for anyway, which is they want to spend 2.2 trillion. They should go ahead and do that. The question is, when it fails, I'm also hoping the Republicans also don't want to go for it as well. That way, Manchin and Sinema and all these other fools will not have the excuse of, oh, we didn't even try to get the bipartisan blah 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 because we had the bipartisan thing and it was because of the House that we couldn't pass it. So I'm hoping that enough of these Republicans are just pump faking, and this will have to go through reconciliation, this fall. That's what I think is going to happen. That's what my gut is saying. I don't think they're going to be able to pass a 60 vote infrastructure bill that can also pass the House, because I think the progressives in the House, I think on this issue, I think Pramila Jayapal, I think she's going to try to use her leverage on this. That's what I think. That's my reading of the situation. What do you think?
I can't even call it.
Yeah. It's tough.
I think a lot of this stuff doesn't even matter until we get rid of the filibuster, to be honest. And
Yeah.
I don't know. That's why I'm really coming up with other strategies for local and state government right now.
Yeah.
If they don't pass for the People Act or some type of voting reform with the restrictions that going on in all these states, it's going to be hard to do it on the state level as well in a lot of areas. So that's unfortunately where we at, but we're gonna keep fighting. Make sure y'all share the show, subscribe, share it on social media, because I suck at social media. I'm not gonna lie.
I'm not great at either.
I'm not. I'm not young. I'm fairly young. I'm in my 30s, but I'm like a boomer when it comes to social media. I hate it. So help us out here. Share the show on social media. We on Spotify. Probably with us on Spotify, on YouTube. Subscribe, share. Thanks for tuning in. Peace.
Peace out, y'all.